currently Earth.
On July 21st in the year 365 AD, a powerful earthquake off the coast of Greece causes a tsunami that devastates the city of Alexandria, Egypt. Although there were no measuring tools at the time, scientists now estimate that the quake was actually two tremors in succession, the largest of which is thought to have had a magnitude of 8.0. The quake was centered near the plate boundary called the Hellenic Arc and quickly sent a wall of water across the Mediterranean Sea towards the Egyptian coast. Ships in the harbor at Alexandria were overturned as the water near the coast receded suddenly. Reports indicate that many people rushed out to loot the hapless ships. The tsunami wave then rushed in and carried the ships over the sea walls, landing many on top of the buildings. In Alexandria, approximately 5,000 people continued their eternity, and 50,000 homes were destroyed. The surrounding villages and towns suffered even greater destruction. Many were virtually wiped off the map. It's reported that outside of the city, at least 45,000 people continued their eternity as a result of this event. In addition, the inundation of salt water rendered farmland useless for years to come. Evidence indicates that the area's shoreline was permanently changed by the disaster. Slowly but steadily, the buildings of Alexandria's royal quarter were overtaken by the sea following the tsunami. It was not until 1995 that archaeologists discovered the ruins of the old city off the coast of present-day Alexandria. On July 21st in 1925, the, quote, trial of the century, unquote, draws our nation's attention. School teacher John T. Scopes is convicted of violating Tennessee's law against teaching evolution in public schools. The case debated in so-called, quote, trial of the century, unquote, was never really in doubt. The jury only conferred for a few moments in the hallway before returning to the courtroom with a guilty verdict. Nevertheless, the supporters of evolution won the public relations battle that was really at stake. Despite popular perceptions of the case, fueled in part by the Broadway play and movie Inherit the Wind, the Scopes trial was never more than a show trial. On May 4th in 1925, the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, published a newspaper advertisement offering to help any Tennessee school teacher challenge the new law that had outlawed the teaching of evolution. George W. Rappleyea, a New Yorker who had moved to Dayton, Tennessee, read the ad and persuaded the local townspeople that Dayton should host a trial in order to spark interest in the town. The leaders of the less than 2,000 residents of Dayton quickly came around to Rappleyaa's idea. The school superintendent agreed with the law, but wanted to gain publicity for the town. Even Dayton's prosecutors were in on the deal. The last piece of the puzzle was to find a defendant. 24-year-old John T. Scopes, a local high school science teacher and football coach, agreed to fill the role since he wasn't planning on staying in Dayton for the long term. No one was really concerned whether he had actually taught evolution to his students. The fact that he had been using the state-approved science textbooks, which included a chapter on evolution, was deemed sufficient. A warrant was made for Scopes' arrest, and word went out that the trial would begin in the summer. Although the rest of Tennessee was displeased with Dayton's plan, 500 seats were added to the town's courtroom for press and spectators, and loudspeakers were set up on the lawn outside and in 4 auditoriums around town. This proved necessary when the nation's leading figures in the evolution debate hijacked the case from the local attorneys. William Jennings Bryan, a former congressman who had 3 times run for president before serving as Secretary of State for our 28th president, Woodrow Wilson, took over the prosecution. Bryan had personally initiated the campaign against evolution in the United States. The Tennessee law was his first major success. Knowing that it would be the perfect forum to debate Bryan on the evolution and creationism issue, the great liberal lawyer Clarence Darrow wormed his way into the case as the defense attorney. While the press flooded into Dayton for the showdown between these 2 larger-than-life figures, a Chicago radio station broadcast the trial live, a first in our country. The trial opened on July 10th with magnificent speeches from both Bryan and Darrow. However, it soon became evident that the trial judge was not going to play along. He cut off every attempt by Darrow to debate the validity of evolution. The trial would have been completely uneventful except for a creative gambit by Darrow. He called Bryan as a witness. Although the judge would never have allowed a prosecutor to be called as a defense witness, Bryan didn't dare back down to the challenge. In a famous exchange, Darrow questioned Bryan on the literal interpretation of the Bible's account of the beginning of the world. With masterful questioning, Darrow forced Bryan to admit that a purely literal interpretation was not possible, making him look very foolish. Darrow's performance didn't save Scopes from a conviction and $100 fine. It was later overturned on a technicality, but in the mainstream press, the theory of evolution clearly won the debate. On July 21st in 1955, our 34th president, Dwight D. Eisenhower, presented his Open Skies Plan. President Eisenhower presented his Open Skies Plan at the 1955 Geneva Summit meeting with representatives of France, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. The plan, though never accepted, laid the foundation for our 40th president, Ronald Reagan's later policy of, quote, trust but verify, unquote, in relation to arms agreement with the Soviet Union. Eisenhower met with Prime Minister Anthony Eden of Great Britain, Premier Edgar Faure of France, and Premier Nikolai Bulganin of the Soviet Union, acting for Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, in Geneva in July 1955. The agenda for the summit included discussions on the future of Germany and arms control. As it became clear that no consensus could be reached on the issue of possible German reunification or the precise configuration of an arms control agreement, Eisenhower dramatically unveiled what came to be known as his Open Skies proposal. The Open Skies proposal called for our country and the Soviet Union to exchange maps indicating the exact location of every military installation in their respective nations. With these maps in hand, each nation would then be allowed to conduct aerial surveillance of the installations in order to assure that the other nations were in compliance with any arms controls agreements that might be reached. While the French and British expressed interest in the idea, the Soviets rejected any plan that would leave their nation subject to surveillance by a Western power. Khrushchev declared that Eisenhower's open skies was nothing more than a, quote, espionage plot, unquote. Indeed, open skies was much less than an espionage plot. Eisenhower himself was later quoted as saying that he knew the Soviets would never accept the plan, but thought that their rejection of the idea would make the Russians look like they were the major impediment to the arms control agreement. For the Soviets, the idea of U.S. planes conducting surveillance of their military bases was unthinkable. They did not want it known that the Soviet Union was far behind our country in terms of its military capabilities. Our country soon found that out anyway. Just a few months after the Soviet rejection of open skies, the Eisenhower administration approved the use of high-altitude spy planes, the famous U-2s, for spying on the Soviet Union. 30 years later, President Reagan would use much the same rhetoric in his arms control dealings with the Soviet Union. Arms control, he declared, could only be effective if compliance with such agreements could be verified. Quote, trust but verify, unquote, became Reagan's standard phrase.